Good day, everyone. I'm Professor Plumbob. Today, I want to talk to you about the role of reason in our search for truth. That's reason with a capital R. Specifically, I want to talk about deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. It turns out that there are many barricades, detours, and wrong turns on the pathway to truth. Consider that for the last few months, the two political parties in our country have been engaged in a fierce civil war of words over what is true and what is false. George Conway, a Republican who over the last 4 years has become quite a harsh critic of President Trump, recently wrote an article, an editorial, for the Washington Post. And I would like to read to you the first two paragraphs. What I Really Believe by George T. Conway III. I believe in truth, democracy, and the rule of law. I believe in a lot of other things as well, but after the past 4 years, these seem most important now. I believe truth isn't always easy to find or to face. I believe that, as human beings, we tend to believe what we want to believe because that's easier, more soothing, and convenient. But I believe, as the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan said, everyone is entitled to their own opinions, but not to their own facts. I believe that you must be willing to change your views as you learn new facts. René Descartes, the famous French philosopher and mathematician, was deeply troubled by the difficulty of distinguishing truth from error and falsehood, and of distinguishing true knowledge from misunderstanding. In his discourse on the method of rightly conducting one's reason and of seeking truth in the sciences, Descartes was forced to confess that our senses are frequently subject to error. He argued that to get to the truth of things, he must start by doubting everything. He then asked himself, what can I know with certainty? He concluded that he cannot doubt his own existence, and he based his certainty of his own existence on the very fact that he had thoughts, including thoughts about his own existence. In short, as he famously put it, I think, therefore I am. In essence, he was saying that consciousness is real and is fundamental to understanding what else is real and true. In modern terms, he was saying that the inner reality of our mind and our thoughts is no less real than the external reality of the world around us, even though our mind's representation of that external reality is incomplete, imprecise, and sometimes incorrect. He believed that the mind and the body were separate, each with its own independent reality, a formulation known as Cartesian dualism. The body belonged to the physical world, whereas the mind belonged to a world of souls. As I said earlier, Descartes was also a mathematician. Remember that he invented analytic geometry and the Cartesian coordinate system. So it might not surprise you that the idea of using deductive reasoning appealed to him very much. After all, Euclid's invention of geometry back in the days of ancient Greece was a triumph of deductive reasoning. Starting with 5 postulates or axioms, Euclid filled 13 volumes with theorems, constructions, and proofs. Descartes, starting with his fundamental axiom, I think, therefore I am, attempted to deduce a whole system of knowledge. Among historians of philosophy, this approach is known as rationalism. Like Descartes before him, the Scottish philosopher David Hume also wondered how in the world can we ever come to know anything? However, he was not very impressed with Descartes' approach to the problem. Descartes' axiom, "I think, therefore I am," might well be true, but Hume was not convinced that one could construct a valid and comprehensive theory of knowledge using nothing but deductive reasoning from a starting point such as that. Instead, he felt that we must still rely on our senses and on our observations of the external world. You have to understand that between the time of Descartes and Hume, the scientific revolution had reached a climax with the brilliant discoveries of Sir Isaac Newton. Newton's genius was his ability to use mathematics to explain our observations. His theory of gravity, for example, showed the astoundingly close relationship between mathematical formulas and physical phenomena, both here on Earth and in the heavens. Hume's emphasis on observations and experiment is in keeping with the spirit of the scientific revolution and with the British school of thought known as empiricism. Empiricism was very much in opposition to the rationalism of Descartes, with its emphasis on deductive reasoning from abstract ideas. Hume believed that any attempt to acquire knowledge must start with our experiences and with inductive reasoning. Hume's criticism of Descartes was a little unfair. The fact is that Descartes was a very important figure in the early scientific revolution prior to Newton. For example, Descartes was really the first to recognize the clear distinction between the external reality of the physical world and the internal reality of the mind. Even more importantly, Descartes recognized that the bridge between these two realities was the nervous system. That is, the brain and especially our sensory systems. This drawing by Descartes shows a boy who has placed his foot a little too close to the fire. And it clearly is meant to indicate that the fire has produced a signal in the nerves of the foot, and that signal is transmitted up the leg through the spinal cord to the brain. This next drawing by Descartes shows visual information being received in the eye and transmitted from there deep into the brain to the areas that process visual information. So Descartes clearly shows a pretty sophisticated understanding for his time of how the nervous system is arranged anatomically and how it basically works. However, recall that Descartes wants to believe that the mind is yet something separate from the body and its brain. And so he offered an intriguing hypothesis. He was aware of a tiny structure deep inside the brain known as the pineal gland. And since the function of the pineal gland was unknown at that time, he proposed that it served as the portal through which information from the brain and from the body passed through to the mind, which, again, existed completely outside the physical world. So any discussion of the connection between a theory of knowledge and neuroscience has to start with Descartes. But now let's go back to Hume and his ideas about inductive reasoning. Now, the essence of inductive reasoning is to use past experiences and observations to predict the future. However, Hume recognized that there was a problem here. Using the past to predict the future assumes that the future will always resemble the past. Every day, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Therefore, you might predict that the sun will do the same thing again tomorrow. But how do you prove that? One could argue, wrote Hume, that there are many, many examples of predictable events. Whenever I spend too much time in the sun, I get a sunburn. Perhaps, he thought, there is a law of induction, such that a pattern of cause and effect that has been well established in the past will continue to hold true in the future. But what is the proof of the law of induction? To say that the law of induction must always be true because it has always been true in the past is to use the law to prove itself. This is a fallacy known as a circular argument. In summary, Hume would say that the scientific method is the best way to make real progress in our understanding of the world. However, there is always this little seed of doubt. In other words, scientific knowledge is always conditional. That is, a scientific law is true if, and only if, it continues to hold true in the future. If new evidence arises showing that the scientific law does not always make the right prediction, then you have to try to reformulate the law. In our next class, we will finish our discussion of objective knowledge and of scientific truth. Spoiler alert! Despite Hume's warning that absolute certainty may always remain just outside our reach, we, as human beings, can still point with pride and amazement to the fact that the body of scientific knowledge has grown exponentially since the time of Hume. Then we will talk about how we make decisions in our everyday lives when we don't have all the facts, when we don't have all the information that we would like to have, when we are nowhere close to 100% certainty. Finally, we will talk about how we form ethical judgments when both objective knowledge and subjective knowledge are equally important. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.